The people who were born with a headwind have a much harder time finding the real pleasures of the bike ride or the real pleasures of a career in the arts because they are facing a headwind. Not that a headwind is always bad, because good things can come out of that, but it's just easier to enjoy the ride when you have a tailwind.
Hi, and welcome back to No Map Included. I'm Yessi Sanchez, and in this podcast, we do things a little bit differently. I'm not telling you directions or whatever, because I feel like someone else's roadmap can't be applied to your own life. You can't expect the same outcomes. So if that sounds good to you, stick around, because today's guest is Taylor Nichols. He is an actor. He's been in the acting industry for 30 plus years, and he's just come back from an insane journey riding with his bicycle from San Francisco to Michigan, which is just an amazing journey of endurance, and I can't wait to hear all about it. So welcome, Taylor.
Hey, Yessi, thanks for having me.
So let's start talking about your bike ride. Where did this idea come from, and what was your reason?
That's a great question, because a lot of people ask that, why are you doing this? I rode 3,461 miles over 53 days. I started in San Francisco, where my daughters live, and I rode up the coast of California into Oregon, which was about 800 miles, longer than I had kind of thought, because I didn't have a map all the time. I turned east and went across Oregon and Idaho and Montana and North Dakota and Minnesota and Wisconsin. I took the ferry across Lake Michigan and then into Michigan, where my dad lives. And my dad is 101, and he is living in the house I grew up in. So I kind of did the ride as a way of connecting my daughters, who, of course, I had a big part in their upbringing and the kind of people that they are, connecting them to my father, who, of course, had a big to do with my growing up and becoming an adult and all of that. So I wanted to connect our family, connect our generations. And I'm a big biker, and I've done a few short trips on a bike, 5 days, things like that. But I've never done a long one. And there's something about going from point A to point B, and not just going out for a ride and doing a loop, but really going somewhere on your bike. That is very empowering, and a message that I want to send to people that at my age, I can ride 3,000 plus miles carrying all the equipment I need to visit my dad.
You said something at the beginning that you didn't have a map. So did you do a lot of intuitive riding?
Well, that's not totally true. I did have a map. There's an organization called Adventure Cycling that maps out routes all around the country. And I used those maps and those routes as a template to sort of patch together the route that I wanted to take. So I did have an idea of where I wanted to go. And I did know that there were roads taking me to those places that were safe to ride on. But I did not religiously stick to the map. Part of the pleasure of the trip was being on my own and making decisions moment by moment where I would go and what I would do. Would I stop here for food and water, or do I need to stop here for food and water because there isn't food or water for the next 50 miles? So I really had to kind of use my map as an overall guide, but then in the day-to-day, moment-to-moment, I was really just exploring what was out there. If I saw a road that I thought was more fun to ride on, I would often take that route just to see where it went.
I think that translates so beautifully to life in general, because you always feel like you have the whole map. You always feel like, or you have a vision of where you want to go, you have your goals, but like you don't know if you want to take this route or that route in the moment. And I think it is a great metaphor as well for life, and like a good reminder that you don't have to have everything mapped out, that you can take a little bit of a detour, and it might even be like a beautiful detour.
Right.
And I feel like in life, we as a society see detours as something that, I mean, not everyone, of course, but like a lot of people see detours as something that is horrible. But when you take it into like this perspective of this journey that you went on, I'm sure you've seen extremely beautiful things because of that.
I think you make a great point. As you said at the beginning, I'm an actor, and I was doing an interview about a project that I had done. And the interviewer asked me, how did you plan for a career and what were your plans for your career in, entertainment? And without thinking, the response that I said was, I haven't made and followed a plan in my entire life. I sort of fell into acting and liked it and continued at it. And not that I didn't work hard, not that I didn't study, and not that I didn't do all those things, but I never set up a plan of, I have to do this job, I have to get married at this time, I have to have kids at this time, I have to work with these people. There's something about improvisation that, of course, actors rely on to sort of be in the moment. That is sort of how I've lived a lot of my life, and certainly how I did this bike ride. I improv'd a lot of it. And I think that sets you up to find unfound things on the trip and in life. And when you plan things out so perfectly, you often don't have time for the unplanned people that you meet or the unplanned diversions that you take. And, you said something great about detours, that lots of times, especially being in Los Angeles, we think that a detour is a negative thing, but really it's a positive thing. And I think that's a great way to look at it.
Do you feel like the not knowing, that's what kind of inspired the endurance? Or if you can translate it both to your recent journey and your life as an actor, what is like the common denominator?
Well, not knowing is the common denominator for sure of the trip and my life in entertainment. It's hard not knowing, and it's hard on the people around you. My wife often says, God, I can't make plans, with you because we never know what's going to happen. And in fact, our honeymoon had to be postponed a week or so because I got a job in Europe and I flew to Europe to do the job. And I remember I left the set of the job I was doing in wardrobe, and the car took me to the airport, and I got on a plane to come home to meet my wife to go on our honeymoon. So it's difficult not knowing, but it also opens you to many different things that sometimes are right there in front of you that you just don't see. I didn't plan to move to Los Angeles. I lived in New York, and I just got a job that brought me to Los Angeles. And so I came to Los Angeles. I didn't plan on staying in Los Angeles, but I kept getting work in Los Angeles, so I stayed. Otherwise, I might have not moved to LA if it wasn't in my plan or something like that. So I think the improvisation aspect of life, or let me say this, that the improvisation aspect of a long bike ride is mirrored exactly, I think, in the improvisation aspect of living your life. And you have to be open to where those detours take you, who you meet, what you do, where you work, any number of different things. And it's kind of exciting.
I feel like it is so incredibly inspiring to hear you talk about acting in such a way. And I think it is a good reminder for the listeners, whatever creative endeavors you're doing, that it is so important to quote unquote, go with the flow and improv in your own life and see where it takes you. And also that open-mindedness.
Let me push back for a second on go with the flow, because I think you're totally right. It is going with the flow, but going with the flow also implies a little bit that you don't have your own direction. And I had a direction. I knew where I wanted to go on my bike ride. I wanted to get to my dad's house in East Lansing, Michigan. And I know where I wanted to go in my career. I wanted to work steady. I didn't care if it was a commercial or a TV show or a theater opportunity or a feature film. I knew I wanted to work. And so I set those as my parameters and my goals. So I knew what I wanted. It wasn't that I was wishy-washy and just going with the flow. I think there is a difference in being open to improvisation and going with the flow.
Yeah, I love that distinction so much because when I said going with the flow, I was like, it sounds a little wrong, but I don't really have a good terminology for this. But you're right. Yeah. Going with the flow is it can be a little bit wishy-washy and just doing whatever, it falls in your lap and you did have a direction, and that's the difference. And I think that is a really, really important distinction. So what are some of the struggles that you faced?
The winds were really tough. A lot of headwinds, especially as I was going up the coast of California into Oregon, and a lot of hills. a lot of ups and downs. The downs were almost ruined by knowing that after the downhill, I had an uphill, going north along the coast of California, you go down and up and down and up and down and up. So every time I had a long cruise downhill, I was thinking to myself, there's an uphill coming, right after this. So headwinds and hills are definitely the roadblocks to a smooth ride. But I learned to kind of go with them and not worry about racing up the hill, just taking my time. Sometimes I was going as slow as 4 or 5 miles an hour, up some of these hills. And what I learned was when I had a tailwind, behind me, pushing me, it was much easier to get in the flow of biking and really enjoy the metronome aspect of pedaling and the feeling of the wind blowing in my hair and the feeling of speed on the bike. And when I had a headwind, a wind right in my face, it was much easier to get discouraged and tired and having to stop and rest more and worry that I'm never going to make it. And I had this realization that that's how, in many cases, my life has been. I've been incredibly privileged. I've had a tailwind most of my life because of who I am, where I was born, when I was born, who I was born to, the kind of socioeconomic life I was given as a child and allowed to be an artist. Some people don't have the privilege of not making a lot of money at the beginning of their career. I still struggled and worked hard. I waited tables and I worked at a bike store in New York City, but I had parents who would help me if I needed help. And it just made me think that, the people who were born with a headwind have a much harder time finding the real pleasures of the bike ride or the real pleasures of a career in the arts because they were facing a headwind. Not that headwind is always bad, because good things can come out of that, but it's just easier to enjoy the ride when you have a tailwind. And that was one of the lessons I kind of learned for myself on this trip. And even though I have been privileged, there are lots of headwinds and lots of hills in an entertainment career. And I go through those ups and downs all the time. I have an audition that I think went really well, and I don't get the job. I have a job that I think is going to be a great job, and it turns out to be kind of a mediocre job. Or I don't work for a month or so. So all those things are difficult, and they take a little bit of the fun out of the work.
Yeah.
But they're also part of the struggle. And that's what, when you do get the tailwind, the fact that you've gone through that headwind makes the tailwind all the better.
So do you feel like that's what keeps you going because there is going to be a tailwind again?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And I learned that on the trip also. From day to day, the day might start off with rain. And, when you're camping, rain in the morning is a problem because you have to get up out of your tent and you got to make your breakfast. And then you got to figure out how you're going to wrap your tent up and all that stuff in the rain. So the day could start off really bad. But then as the day goes on, the rain goes away and the sun comes out and now you have a rainbow. And so there really were ups and downs within the same day. And in life, those ups and downs may not be within the same day, but they might be within the same week or the same month or the same season. But knowing that there is a headwind, knowing that there will be a tailwind. I'm a huge silent film fan, and Buster Keaton is one of my favorite artists ever, full stop. And he had an amazing 13-year run of making silent films that still stand the test of time. The General, Steamboat Bill Jr., you name it. He made these incredible films. But then he had a crash in his life. He was a terrible alcoholic and his marriage broke up and he lost control of his movies. And rather than kind of retreating into a shell and giving up on life, he continued to work. And even though he was no longer the head of his own studio and the star of his own movies, he continued to work. He did TV, he did commercials, he did small parts in movies, and he just continued to work. And so I knew what I wanted to do was work, just work. And so I started working wherever I could get work. And that was in musical theater at the beginning. And so I did the National Company of 42nd Street and the National Company of Sugar Babies. And I did regional theater on My Toes and Shenandoah and, many other musicals. And I just worked. And that's where I learned so much about the business, not only getting along with other people, but how to perform on stage, how to rehearse, how to prepare, how to audition. And I, of course, studied at the same time. I studied with a man named Terry Schreiber in New York for a long time. But I knew that I wanted to work. So once I started getting work in film and TV, I just continued to work. I did small parts in big movies and big parts in small movies. And as long as they paid me, and even sometimes when they didn't pay me, I worked. And so that was my goal, just to work. And I believe strongly that work begets work. However,
100%.
sometimes, and I've heard other people say this, your career is defined by the jobs that you turn down. And I turned down very few jobs. And sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice about taking this job or doing that job. And would I have been better served by saying, no, I'm not going to do that job for whatever reason, because the money's not enough, because the role's not the kind of role that I want to do, or the people that are producing and directing the film don't really have their stuff together. And so I don't want to be a part of that project. So I wonder whether it has always served me well. I think for the most part, it has served me well, but I do wonder if there have been times when I might have been smarter to have not taken a certain job and held out for a better job.
What is the reason for you saying that? So because you feel like maybe something better would have come if you turned them down, or is it more like a boundary to like not burn out, or like where is that?
I think the
thought
first
coming
one,
from?
that a better job might have come along. I don't know if you know who Bruce Campbell is, but he's a pretty well-known character actor. He did a lot of the Evil Dead movies.
Mhm.
Told me a story one time. We did a movie together a long time ago called Congo, and he told me a great story that he had auditioned for the Coen brothers for 2 or 3 of their movies. And he auditioned and didn't get the job. And he auditioned and didn't get the job, and auditioned and didn't get the job. And finally, they asked him to audition for, I think it was the Hudsucker Proxy. And he said, no, I won't audition. But if you want to offer it to me, I'll take it. And they offered it to him and he took it. And so there's something about standing up for yourself and saying, I'm not going to jump through every hoop to get every job. And I think sometimes that's what I did by taking every job, as opposed to saying, no, you have to pay me more. No, I'm really right for this other role that might be bigger, or I really want to have more of a say in the production or something like that, rather than just going with the flow and letting the job take me wherever it took me. And so while I think working has been very important, sometimes I do wonder if I made a mistake by going back to what we were saying, going with the flow.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, as actors, we are taught to just take everything, especially at the beginning of your career. And
Well, I think that that's true at the beginning of your career.
Yeah.
People often worry, young women often worry about, God, do I really want to play a prostitute? Or older white actors worry, do I really want to play a pervert or a pedophile? There's no question that our business stereotypes people. And for good or bad, that's what it does. And it takes an extraordinary person like Denzel Washington or whatever to break that mold and be the lead and not be, the quote unquote drug dealer, or Bob Odenkirk to break that role and not be the pedophile, but be the lawyer, or, those two examples.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I have the DVD here, City of Love. I played a stripper in City of Love, and that was the most fun I've ever had on set. It was, just for the listeners, a little background. Taylor and I were in the same movie, and we never met on set, but I really love City of Love. I think it turned out to be really great. And like I said, I had the most fun on set playing a stripper.
Great. Yeah. And that's one of the fun things about acting is you get to kind of live out
Yeah.
a life that you may not normally live out.
Exactly. That's the main reason why I got into acting, because I wanted to do so many different things and with my life. I was so curious about so many different things. And so I was like, you know what? Acting. I mean, I've always been very artistic and I started performing really early on. But when I decided to like stick to acting instead of any other creative endeavor, I was really like, this is my opportunity to live out all of my wildest dreams.
Right, right,
Not
right,
that it
right,
was my wildest dream to be a stripper, but
right.
to play someone who is so completely different and who just curses out people. It is fun to just be someone else for a day or however long you're shooting and do things that are completely out of character. And I think that's the beauty of acting.
I want to push back on that also because I don't even think of it as out of character. I think of it as if Yessie was going to be a stripper, how would Yessie be a stripper? Because you would
Right.
be a stripper differently from how I would be a stripper and
100%.
or from any other person. And so it's in my mind, it's not living someone else's life. It's finding that in your own life. And I think
Yeah.
that's what makes acting so different and unique is you can't be a stripper the way, name a movie star would be a stripper.
Yeah.
You have to be a stripper the way Yessie would be a stripper.
Yeah. Yeah. It all goes back to what we said in the beginning, that like you can't take someone else's roadmap and put it into your life and expect the same outcome. It's the same thing with acting. You're unique to yourself. And so I 100% agree with that. And I feel like you do, when you're an actor, you do take everything from somewhere within. And yeah, so I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I totally think, the idea that you can't follow anyone else's map in life, but certainly in acting is very true. And if you try to, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment.
Exactly. Yeah. I do want to talk a little bit about the changes in the acting industry in the last 30 plus years.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say in the past 30 years. I would say in the past 5 years.
Mhm.
It's really, really funny. When I first came out to LA in the early mid 90s to do a TV series, one of the actors on the TV series, a guy named George Weiner, really a wonderful character actor, said to me one day when we were sitting in our trailers talking, he said, "Oh, you just missed it. The 80s was a golden time in Hollywood. Lots of money, lots of work." And I remember thinking 10 or 15 years later when I was the older actor and I was meeting some people who had just come to LA in the early teens, 2010, 2012, thinking you guys just missed it. The 90s and the aughts were golden years for actors and for acting. A lot of money, a lot of work. And I think now someone who came in the teens might say to someone who's just coming to LA now or just coming in the business now, you just missed it. The era just gone by was a golden era for this business. However, that is a little bit true since COVID. COVID has changed so many things for acting. In many ways, good. It has flattened the entry level bar. You no longer have to be on a casting director's short list to be seen for a TV show or a movie because casting directors now see hundreds of people for every role because we do these things called self-tapes.
Yeah.
And self-tapes is when you audition for the role by filming yourself at home or wherever, doing the audition sides and then sending them to the casting director. So the casting director doesn't need to schedule 10 actors for one role in an afternoon for the director to see them. The casting director can put out a notice looking for this role and then can accept hundreds of self-tape auditions for that one role. And then they look through the hundreds and turn over 10 or 15 or 5 or whatever it is to the director to look at, to then choose. So it has changed a little bit the way we get work. But it's also changed the work a little bit. There used to be a lot of guest star work. And guest star work is important because it allows a starting out actor to do 2 or 3 different jobs on 2 or 3 different shows and work with different directors, different producers, different casting directors, different actors, and get some real experience under their belt. But now that we have streaming and most TV shows are 8 episodes or, something like that, there aren't as many guest star roles. There are maybe 8 series regular roles and 1 or 2 guest star roles, as opposed to the old model was, 1 or 2 or 3 series regular roles and 8 guest star roles. So the level of employment at the bottom was much broader. There were more opportunities to get your foot in the door to work. Now it's pretty tough to get that first job.
Yeah.
Because if you're going for one of the guest star roles, there might only be 3 guest star roles and they're seeing hundreds of people. And so while you may be really right for the part, there also might be an actress who has a long list of credits who is also reading for that part. And not always, but 9 times out of 10, they will take the actor who is most experienced because they need to know that that actor can deliver when the director says action, and that they're prepared and they're good and they won't be thrown off by things that are going off on the set or around the set. So they can trust the actor with more credit. So it's harder to break in, while it's also easier to break in because we have this thing called YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. And so as the business changes and one door closes, really windows really do open for other avenues to break into the business.
Yeah, I think you've put that beautifully. There is always a door opening. There is always new avenues to explore. And I feel like if you have a phone, you can film something, and put it out
Absolutely.
there. Like you do have those resources that you can use yourself, and you can take that as work as well. Even though you do your own project, it is exploring and just jumping into different ways of storytelling. So I think that is very beautiful. As we're getting closer to the end of this episode, I do want to talk a little bit more about Bike Talk, your podcast. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah. Bike Talk is a radio show and a podcast. We're on about 16 markets around the country, but most people listen to us online at biketalk.org or Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you listen to stuff. The show is dedicated to the idea that the bicycle is an underutilized tool of transportation. Not only is it a method of fun and relaxation and all that, it can really be used. And I think, there's a great quote that says, biking doesn't solve any one problem, but it's a part of the solution to many problems. And I think that's true, whether it be climate change or congestion, traffic, personal health, mental health, all those kinds of things, obesity. A bicycle as active transportation can be a real tool to help a community become more vibrant, more prosperous, and more healthy. We live, especially you and I, in Los Angeles in a very car-dominated area. But if I can ride my bike from San Francisco to Michigan carrying 35 or 40 pounds of gear, if our leaders can make our roads safe, other people can choose to ride if they want to. No one's trying to force anybody to ride a bike, but other people can choose to ride to the grocery store or to coffee or to work or to school. And just by doing those simple errands, I'm sure you've heard this before that, 50% of all trips in a car are under 2 miles. Well, 2 miles on a bike is nothing. 2 miles walking is kind of a pain. It takes a long time. It might be hot. It might not be a great walk. But 2 miles on a bike is nothing. And if you can carry your groceries or your work supplies or school books, then it makes it all the easier. And studies have proven that when we put in a bike lane, it actually increases business on the street where that bike lane is, because what it really does is just slow down cars. And when you slow down cars, you make the roads safer for everybody. Not just pedestrians and people who bike, but also people who drive. Traffic violence kills between 40 and 45,000 Americans every year. And if our aviation system or our train system or our water system or sewer system killed 40 to 45,000 Americans every year, we would do something about it. But our leaders have been very slow to make our streets safe. And so on Bike Talk, we not only celebrate the bike by, talking about my trip and the people that I met on my trip and things like that. But we also talk to authors and politicians and advocates and journalists about these kinds of things that can create a safer, quieter, cleaner neighborhood for everybody to live in. Because you really don't need to start your car, drive 5 blocks, park in a mini mall parking lot, go into the store, come out with a gallon of milk, and you've spent a gallon of gas just to get a gallon of milk. You can easily do a trip like that if we create a safe place to do it on a bicycle. And that's what we try to do on Bike Talk. So I really encourage your listeners, if they're interested at all in urban planning or active transportation, to give Bike Talk a listen at biketalk.org or, like I said, Spotify or Apple Music.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I used the bicycle as a means of transportation for a very long time here in LA, but it really scares me. It really, some drivers are just really horrible.
Right.
And cut me off and stuff like that. And there have been instances where I was almost hit several times. And it's just it has really scared me. And it's just I've taken the bike culture from Europe, everyone uses a bike there. That's just totally normal. But here, especially in LA, especially in such a big city where there are crazy drivers, it is really, really scary. So hopefully we're all going to be a little bit more on our bikes in our future.
Right. Well, a lot of that is learning routes to take to get to the places you want to go that aren't on main streets, that aren't on busy streets, that are on quiet neighborhood streets. And then it really is fun because you feel safe on a quiet neighborhood street.
Definitely, definitely. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for all your insights. I definitely learned a lot, and it was definitely a good reminder to improv a little bit more in life and have no map. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on?
Yes, just thank you very much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed it, and I love the title of your podcast, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to meet on City of Love, but I'm glad that we're meeting now.
Yeah, there were so many different actors on that set. It was impossible to meet everyone. You just listened to No Map Included. I'm your host, Yessi Sanchez, and if you enjoy conversations like these, please consider following. I post new episodes every Tuesday, and I'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment with whatever you're going through right now. I definitely am looking forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you next time.